one transformation process might be the initiation of young men. Now, it's more typical for young men to be initiated than young women. And no one really knows why that is, except men seem to be able to go more spectacularly wrong than women. So if you look at, we'll talk about that later. But there's also competing theories that say you don't have to initiate women because nature does that all by itself. And I think that that's not a particularly bad way of looking at it. So, women are going to be confronted with the brute force of nature. But men can either do that or not do it. And so there's in some sense an element of choice. And so the initiation rituals take away the element of choice. And so in a typical initiation ritual, what happens is that young men, usually at the onset of puberty, are taken away from their familial dependence, which really means their mothers, and then they're put into some situation and terrified 3/4 to death. Now, more or less they do that voluntarily. So perhaps, here's an example. Maybe you're 13. So remember, think about, you're 13. Think about that. Okay, and so you're still afraid of the dark when you're 13, even though you'll tell people that you aren't, but you are. So then you think, well, maybe it's just a park, but you're still out there and it's dark and you're afraid. And you might say, well, what are you afraid of? And one of the things you might come up with is, well, you're afraid of what you're imagining. And then you might say, well, does that mean that you're afraid of your imagination? Or are you afraid of the things your imagination represents? Well, you kind of have to think, if there's no actual objective danger there, then what you're afraid of is your imagination. A horror movie is often more effective if they don't show you what's making those horrible noises off screen. You know, because no matter what they show you, the probability that it can be as personally horrible as whatever monsters you're dredging up out of your imagination is very low. And you know, it's reasonable to be afraid of the dark because throughout our biological history, lots of unfortunate people were devoured by things in the dark or hurt very badly by them, etc., etc. And we're also daytime creatures, right? So we don't like the dark very much. So what you do to someone if you're going to initiate them is maybe you take them when they're 13 and you put them in a really dark cave. And caves, they're so dark, man. Like if you're in a cave, you just can't believe how dark it is. You can't see anything in a cave. So you don't know how big the space you're in is, and you don't know how small it is, and you don't know whether or not it's going to collapse or whether it's going to stay up. And you don't know how far you are underground, especially if the people who took you there didn't, walked you around in circles and didn't let you know where you were going. And then maybe they leave. And maybe they leave for 3 days. And so you're sitting down there thinking, well, what are you thinking exactly? Well, you're thinking the most horrible thoughts you could possibly imagine. Right? I'm never going to get out of here. They're never going to find me again. Some horrible snake thing that lives in the darkness is going to come and eat me slowly, because fast would be, merciful. And then I'm also going to go completely out of my mind so that even if something doesn't eat me, I'm going to come out of here and it'll be worse than being dead anyways. And so partly what you're doing in that circumstance is you're facing the demons of your own imagination. And if you can stand that, then you grow up. And that's what an initiation ceremony does. Now, a lot of what you'll find if you look at clinical theories of psychology, the same motif applies. If you want to get better, you have to find out what you're avoiding and what you're afraid of, and maybe what you're disgusted by even. And you have to expose yourself to that voluntarily, and you have to let that change you. And so it's not a pleasant prospect. I mean, it's not dancing through a field of daisies, right, with Muzak playing. And it's not follow your bliss, It's not the natural unfolding of a positive process. It's not that at all. It's the voluntary confrontation with the things that make up life's horrors. But what's interesting about it is that there's an idea there that lurks under the surface archetypally, and that is, there's a lot more to you than meets the eye. But it won't be released unless it has to. And so you're not going to even figure out what it is until you put yourself in peril. Now, part of that you might think, like, imagine that you're an introvert and you're socially awkward and you're highly neurotic, so you feel a lot of anxiety and depression. You don't like going to parties, and that's because the horrible tyrant lives at parties and always glaring at you and judging you and telling you how useless and insufficient you are. And so you go there and you don't even look at people because you know that if you did look at them, you'd just see the face of the judgmental tyrant, which, by the way, you wouldn't if you actually looked at them, but you won't because you avoid. And so you're going to go there and you're going to put yourself in this terrible situation, and if you're lucky and you're a bit awake, then you're going to incorporate all sorts of information from the external world that will help you develop your social skills and make you more sophisticated. And even if that doesn't happen, you're going to learn that you can tolerate your own fear. And you might say, well, what's better? To not be afraid or to know that you can handle being afraid? And obviously to not be afraid. But give that up, because that ain't happening. So the next best thing and the realistic thing is to know that you're the master of your own fear. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about in relationship to classical theories of personality is exactly that. It's not that the world isn't terrible. It's that the world is terrible. But you're a lot stronger than you think. Or maybe you're afraid to do what you need to do next. Well, here's a rule. Don't avoid doing things because they make you feel negative emotion if you have to do those things in order to pursue your goals. In fact, you should do exactly the opposite. So let's say you're pursuing a goal and you find that you're afraid about something and so you're avoiding it. The first thing you should think is, aha! Look, I'm afraid of something and I'm avoiding it. Dragon. Treasure. Exactly there. And that's exactly right. It's precisely right. If you're afraid of the thing, then what that means is that you're not developed enough to handle it. And you need to be. So you should think about that as a discovery, like a positive discovery. You found out where you have a weakness, and you're now able to address it. So, if you're an introvert and you think, it's Friday night, I could go to this party, but, I really don't want to. Then you think, oh, that means I should go. And that's exactly right, because you already know how to do the things that you know how to do. And it's the things that you don't know how to do that bother you and oppress you. And of course those things are going to be difficult to learn about, but you need to learn about them because you need to get yourself all switched on. How's that? Switched on. Because then you'll be able to tolerate the fact that life is fundamentally suffering. And so the world doesn't get safer as you develop. In fact, quite the contrary. You just get more competent. And that's better anyways, because it's conceivable that you don't want safety anyways. You probably want adventure. You probably want to be compelled. You probably want to be engaged. If you want security, you might as well be dead. Well, because nothing's happening then, and there's no danger left. To be alive is to be contending with the world. And you want to be the best at that you can possibly be. And that's partly what we're going to learn about as we go through the entire course, but certainly the elements that have to do with clinical psychology. Because all of them circulate around this fundamental theme. They have to, because it's the fundamental story of mankind. And we want to know what that fundamental story is, because you're all human, and you need to know the story. And then, you can decide how you're going to act it out. The absolute unknown. That's where you go when things fall apart. You don't know where you are, so where are you? You're where you don't know what things are, and that's a place. And what's interesting about it is that there are rules to act in that place. And that's what's so helpful, because, if you're in a place and you don't know what to do, and that's that, you're done. But if there's a pattern to what you can do in a circumstance like that, then... you land on your feet and you're ready to contend, and maybe the trip down into the underworld is something you can undertake on your own accord, and you can come back with the treasure instead of ending up as dragon food or worse. And then when you're conceptualizing your relationship to other people, well, let's say to society, first of all, it's like, yeah, obviously you face a tyrant. Of course you do. But that isn't all you face, and you need to be grateful for what you've been given by your culture. And you actually have to understand what that culture is, because it's you. And if you don't rescue that part of you and that part of the culture, then everything gets dead and stale and tyrannical, and everything goes immediately to hell. And that's not a good thing. And then with regards to nature, well, you obviously have to appreciate the positive element of nature, and you have to enter into a relationship with it. But you don't bloody well want to forget that, like, things are out to get you. And you have to be intelligent and ready and awake so that you can prevail against that. And you have to be grateful for what you've been offered by other people and by the tremendous efforts of all of human culture across all of the time that's put you in a position where you're so unbelievably privileged and have so many opportunities at your disposal. Well, so that's kind of the archetypal story of human beings. We always face nature, and it's always on our side. We always face our culture. It's always on our side. And we always have ourselves and those things that are arrayed against us, internally, externally. And you could say that's the existential world. It's the world of drama. And the things that are really compelling to you as means of communicating, use those categories to provide you with information. Because what you're trying to figure out is, if that's the landscape that makes up your being, so that's a phenomenological idea, how is it that you weave your way through it? Well, that's what we're going to figure out while we go through this class. Okay, so that's the mythological background. So there's the characterological elements that I just described, and then there's the punctuated movement forward. Now, the problem with that is that when things fall apart, it's not like you just fall apart psychologically. It's not just a psychological condition. If someone's betrayed you deeply, that might be because you're naive and unready. Maybe that's a psychological element. Maybe you're just young and you don't know better, and you couldn't. But there's also the real fact of the problem that you have in fact been betrayed and now you don't know what to do. So there's reality in it as well as just what's psychological. And so one of the ways that you might construe personality theories that have to deal with a description of the way people are and a description of how they might move towards mental health is that they're maps that tell you they're maps of that landscape that tell you how to orient yourself so that you can succeed. And even better, and this is a Piagetian idea, it's not only so that you can succeed, it's so that you can succeed in a way that your family succeeds, so that they can succeed in a way that society succeeds, so that everything works better at the same time. And that's really success. And that's like you're winning a game that everyone wants to play. Well, what a deal. You get to move forward and everyone else gets to enjoy it. Well, that's a good definition of success. It's an archetypal definition of success, actually, because if you succeed properly, then your success benefits everyone else.